So Variety has released an article about the MCU, talking about a lot of the issues that Marvel has been experiencing as of the past couple of years since Endgame. It's reignited some of the negative discourse surrounding the MCU, or variations of the headline of, is Marvel dead? Is Marvel gonna die? Should we start to write the obituary of the MCU? You get the idea. One of you guys sent me the article and I had a chance to read most of it. When I read news articles, it's really a lot of stuff and a lot of words that go over my head, but I try to give it the time of the day to the best of my ability. I did a video like this about a year and a half ago with the MCU Phase 4 in particular, where I thought that it was better than most people were giving it credit for at the time. I still stand by what I said. You can go back and watch the video if you want. It's somewhere on my channel. It's from last year, like I said. I'm more or less probably going to repeat some of the same stuff that I said there. However, I do have to be honest. There are problems that the MCU is facing. Do I think Marvel's in trouble or dead and that they should pull the plug and we should write the obituary of the MCU? That it should have ended after Endgame? Short answer? No. No, I don't think so. Every franchise is going to go through a rough spot of some sort. Star Wars has gone through it many times with the prequels and with the sequels. DC, well, more rough patches and good stretches. There's a long list of popular franchises I could talk about, but this isn't the first time we've seen a rough spot for a movie series like this, and it's certainly not going to be the last time. Some of it was outside of their control, but I also think some of it was their own fault. To get that out of the way, you had all these Disney Plus shows that were coming out. It's a lot to absorb. Most of them were 6 episodes, and some, like WandaVision, probably about 8 episodes. That to me feels like a reasonable stretch for a television show, maybe even 10 episodes. 6 episodes is way too short. I may or may not have said it before, I can't remember exactly. But this is a problem I think the Marvel writers on the TV side are facing. They cruise along with some momentum and then they realize they have to wrap it up and it feels kind of like, whoop! You see what I mean? And this article from Variety, this came off, I think, like it was kicking something while it's down, and it didn't really seem to address any of the good stuff that's come out of the post-Endgame era. I mean, it listed Shang-Chi as a disappointment. I actually think Shang-Chi is a really good time. It came out in late 2021, and the box office returns wasn't exactly amazing or anything, but considering the post-pandemic climate, well, we were still kind of in the arena of the coronavirus pandemic, but we were getting out of it at the same time. We still had to go through Omicron before then, but there was a sign that things were starting to improve, and that Marvel was actually proving that they could do stuff wasn't exactly related to Iron Man or Captain America and the original 6 Avengers members. I don't remember the exact number of the box office returns, but I think for the time, the way the cinematic landscape was and the box office landscape, it actually wasn't that bad. And it came out around Labor Day of that year, so that might have helped. Eternals, that's divided in half. I think it was a fine movie. I didn't think it was bad. It just felt way too long. I think in hindsight, it might have been better as like a 10-episode series, because after a while, I felt like it overstayed its welcome. Now, of course, people will talk about how it was too political because of certain people of certain skin color or sexuality. I've said many times before, I don't give a crap about any of that stuff. And if you think that's the main reason why Marvel is failing, please get a grip on yourselves. Even if that is a problem, that's not the main one. There's other factors going on here. Multiverse of Madness was alright, but I felt like the title was misleading. Going in, I thought it was actually going to be all this crazy multiversal traveling, and we got some of that in the movie. Really, the only madness that we get is when, well, spoiler warning if you still haven't seen Multiverse of Madness. If you haven't, then skip to this timestamp. It turns out the only kind of madness that we see is Wanda killing all the members of the Illuminati. John Krasinski's Reed Richards, Captain Carter, Charles Xavier, which was nice to see Sir Patrick Stewart return once again, even though it was a different variation of the character. First and third act felt like a Sam Raimi movie, while still retaining the MCU aesthetic. It's really the middle chapter that I think the movie lost its momentum. It felt like there was a lot of stuff that the studio wanted to put in there, and you could debate on whether or not that was the right move. I think it was nice to see the Easter eggs that people have been wanting to see in the MCU, but Multiverse of Madness, like I said, it wasn't that bad as far as I'm concerned anyway, but the title was very misleading. I don't know what I would call it in vein of what we experienced in this movie. They go through all these different parallel dimensions and the Scarlet Witch is just chasing them. And the closest we get to seeing some kind of multiversal madness start to happen is at the end of the movie when Charlize Theron's character shows up, besides Wanda killing all those people. Then it comes to Love and Thunder, which has the problem of the VFX artists being pushed to their limits on trying to get the effects right. And this has been brought up by people online 2,100 1,000 million times, to the point where I just want to say, could I have a nickel for every time I hear you guys talk about that? I gotta admit though, the movie I thought was fine. I was a little more positive on it when I first saw it. Looking back, I didn't think it was good as I thought, but I certainly didn't think it was awful either. I'm not really crazy about Taika Waititi's style, and I didn't think it was any better in Thor Ragnarok, although I think Ragnarok is more consistent and more tighter. Love and Thunder felt a lot more stretched out, and it took a long time for it to actually find its footing. That first 40 minutes or so felt like it was a lot of setup and trying to catch up and see what Thor's been up to. And I didn't really care for Russell Crowe as Zeus. I thought that was just way too much. I'll save my updated thoughts for another time. I think if anything, it was watchable. The effects though, were noticeable in certain areas. The color palette in particular in certain shots, like in the indoor scenes when they're in their new Asgard. Noticing it on Blu-ray, even watching some clips online, I think that's the best you got. You couldn't have cleaned that up any further. There's a lot more to the situation with the VFX artists. The scripts were changing on the fly because of the coronavirus pandemic, which caused all these films to be delayed to a certain time. That, unfortunately, I think threw a wrench into everything that was going on. It looked like from the start of 2020 that things were going to go as smoothly, but then the pandemic hit and everything closed down, and then Hollywood had to try to find a way to get things moving again, and they had to wait and see how the situation with the pandemic was going. And by the time 2022 had rolled in, people were already starting to go back to their lives. Films were already starting to come out. Now, I don't know. I wasn't there. But if I had to guess, I think the studio was pushing the VFX artists too far because they wanted to get the movie out. They're already profiting off of Spider-Man No Way Home's success. And I get it. They wanted to try to make back some of the money that they lost in the years that they were going to release this movie. Still, I think that situation was pretty messed up. I don't think Kevin Feige is to blame for this. I think that there's a guy named Bob Chapek. I don't know his name. One of you guys told me. Sorry for not remembering this like I should. I think Bob, is the one that's to blame here. I'm not talking about Bob Iger. There's plenty of stuff I could say about that guy, but I'm gonna keep it to a minimum here. But this guy, Bob Chapek, please correct me if I got the name wrong. I think he's really the one to blame here because, to my knowledge anyway, from what I can tell, wanting to put out this quantity over quality type of approach with all these small shows featuring these new characters that are going to be the future of the new MCU era. In theory, that concept is not necessarily a bad idea because I think after 10 years of doing somewhat of the same thing all the time, you want to try something different to keep things fresh. In hindsight though, I think Marvel Studios overshot it. You could debate about the qualities of these shows, but I don't think any of them are bad. She-Hulk, looking back on it, I didn't really like how it ended. The show was alright otherwise, but that ending when she talks to that artificial Kevin Feige robot, that was way too out there. I did not like that at all. WandaVision was pretty good. Really like Falcon and Winter Soldier. Miss Marvel was amazing. Moon Knight was also amazing. I just remembered that. That was probably the best thing that Marvel has put out in the post-Endgame era besides No Way Home and Guardians Volume 3. And maybe to a certain degree Loki, which is also a good show so far. Now to detour for a second, I'm starting to get caught up on season 2 of Loki. With all the stuff that happened with Secret Invasion, I watched the premiere episode of Secret Invasion. I was gonna watch the rest of it, but I got distracted by other things. And then when the finale happened and I started to hear how everybody was talking about how bad it was, and I looked into some of what happened, I'll admit, just out of curiosity, I thought, what? You did that? I still haven't even bothered to watch the show because I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to judge it properly for myself because the discourse surrounding it was just way too toxic. It even made me not want to watch the Loki show because the discourse surrounding the MCU right now has just been so negative. And to be honest, it's reminding me of the fandom menace right now with Star Wars. How angry the fans were over the prequel trilogy and even the recent films. It just wasn't fun to talk about anymore. And I even debated about whether or not I should even go see another MCU movie. And I was even questioning whether or not the MCU was even good to begin with. That sounds like I'm being too dramatic, but that's really where my headspace was on the MCU. It's only now that I've actually started to push myself and realize that, you know what? Lone enjoyment is probably better. Pick and choose who you want to go to for MCU reviews. Guys like Cosmic Wonder, I actually have decided that is probably the most reasonable to listen to, just like the Goldman is for Star Wars content. Everybody else on the internet that I've come across, bar select few, mind you, is either really mad about where the MCU is, wanting it to go away, or they're just riding the coattails of the bandwagon to dunk on it for the sake of it in order to earn brownie points from all the haters. I'm not going to say any specific names, but there's a few who I've picked out in my mind as sellouts. So I haven't caught up fully on season 2 of Loki, but so far it's pretty good, and I think it's somewhat of a return to form for the MCU. Based on what this article from Variety has been saying, it seems very negative. Like I said, it's not wanting to talk about any of the good stuff that has come out. This is a common thing with news reporting. They tend to talk about the saucy stuff, the negative side of everything, because it's what sells. Good news is never really profitable. Jonah Jameson says in the Spider-Man 3 video game, "Good guys don't sell papers." And I don't think Kevin Feige's really to blame for all this. I think, unfortunately, he was stretched way too thin, and he wasn't as closely involved as other people have come out and talked about. He didn't have enough time to get involved in the post-production, which I think is what really helped the MCU back in the days of the Infinity Saga. He was closely involved and wanted it to get to a point where it felt right, while also allowing the filmmakers on said project to make it the film that they wanted it to be. It was a healthy 50-50. Some people will argue otherwise, that he is very controlling and wants everything to be a certain way. Well, if that were true, Jon Favreau would not still be in the MCU right now. Yes, they butted heads on Iron Man 2, but ultimately they managed to put it to rest. He was in No Way Home 2 years ago nearly. If he wasn't on good terms with Kevin Feige, why would he still be around? Edgar Wright has never said anything bad about Marvel Studios. He just wasn't on the same page with what he wanted from the Ant-Man movie that Marvel Studios wanted. He's not going around saying all these bad things about Marvel. If there was bad blood between the two, we would have known that by now. And even Joss Whedon, with all of the stuff that's come out about him, he's never gone out and said Kevin Feige did this to me or Marvel Studios did that to me. He's managed to put that behind him with Age of Ultron. I think that hindsight, that might have been too much for him, but after a while, it's pretty clear that he managed to let it go. But there's no denying that people are not feeling so crazy about the MCU right now. Of course, we hear many times on social media that the MCU should have stopped after Endgame. The Martin Scorsese's of the world, or the film bros, as me and some other people like to call them, have taken an opportunity to swing their bats at Marvel. And just to be clear, I do like Martin Scorsese, even if I strongly disagree with his statements on Marvel. Joe or Anthony Russo, one of the Russo brothers, posted a video where he was kind of pushing back against Scorsese for what he said about Marvel. I actually got a kick out of that. But yeah, the discourse has been not so great, and people are wondering if this is the end of the MCU and that maybe they should just put it to bed. And then there's some people out there that want it to improve, and I'm one of those people. I'm not blind to some of the poor decisions that have been made. There's a lot more that I could talk about. For time purposes, I'm going to try to keep it condensed, but it's pretty clear that Marvel's going through a rough spot right now. This is not entirely their fault, but it is some of their own fault. It's almost like 50-50. And Kevin Feige has come out and said that they have taken some of the criticisms into account, and they're going to dial back on the amount of content that they've been putting out. So if anyone is smart enough to try to put some energy back into this, it's him. Just like J.J. Abrams did with Star Wars, with Force Awakens. Say what you want about him in that movie, but he was the right guy for the job at the right time. And there's been some stuff that has come out about certain people being fired for XYZ with the VFX and all that other stuff. I think if Kevin Feige has the right amount of people and the right amount of projects to focus on, whether it was 2 or 3 a year, instead of 3 or 4 projects a year, it was just too much to handle at one time, along with the after effects that were felt by the coronavirus pandemic on Hollywood. So I think if anyone could fix this, it's him. And now, Marvel, yes, was more consistent during the Infinity Saga, but I'm gonna keep saying this for as long as I have to. People didn't like everything about the MCU during that time either. Iron Man 2, Thor 2, Iron Man 3 with the Mandarin twist, Age of Ultron, not everybody liked everything that happened in that movie either. And there were some people that weren't crazy about Civil War. And certain people had complaints about how certain things went down in Infinity War and with Endgame. People have complaints all the time. This is not a new thing. But if you think that everything in the Infinity Saga was a smack 10 out of 10 across the board, newsflash, it wasn't. And I've heard some people say that Marvel needs to have a hit like Endgame. Okay, if you're expecting every project after that to be on that same level, well, you're setting yourself up for disappointment. It was never going to be like that. At least, if anything, not for a long time. It's not to say that they haven't had any home runs along the way. Guardians Volume 3 was really good. Spider-Man No Way Home. Hello? Did everybody forget about No Way Home? That reached $1 billion worldwide. If you want to know my full thoughts on each of those movies, you can check out my reviews. But I think that should be an indicator, along with other things that aren't necessarily part of the MCU, like Across the Spider-Verse. People aren't necessarily tired of comic book movies. There is a noticeable change in box office patterns, that people are craving something else. Oppenheimer made a lot of money this year, especially with the Barbenheimer phenomenon, and the Barbie movie was a huge success, critically and financially, and with the audiences. I think it might actually be a cultural phenomenon. I mean, it was already becoming that going in, and now the impact is a lot more obvious. I still think that if the movies are good for Marvel, then they'll obviously flock to the theater to see it. Now, with Guardians Volume 3 and No Way Home, people will say, well, that's because they had characters that we already knew. Yeah, true, but that doesn't mean that Marvel doesn't have it in them still. If they have the right people at the right time, then they could put out some good content. Anyone who argues that every single project post-Endgame has been mediocre or bad, don't listen to any of that stuff. There is another recent circumstance that isn't really helping them. The actors' strike is still going on, meaning the actors can't talk in interviews to promote their movies. Case in point, the Marvels. The writer's strike is over, yes, but the actor strike is still ongoing, and there might be a deal coming to a close really soon, but we'll see. And the trailers haven't really been that amazing. I did a reaction some time ago, and it looks like good fun, but there's nothing really pulling me in exactly, if you know what I mean. And there's other factors too. The previous Captain Marvel didn't exactly sit well with everybody. Brie Larson's portrayal was heavily hated to the point where I thought it was just insufferable. I have to watch the movie again just to be sure. I might actually do another updated video. The box office trajectory isn't exactly looking too favorable right now. It might actually be the first financial bomb for Marvel. And I also think that, from what I'm hearing anyway, I could be totally wrong here. I've heard this from other people online. With some connections to inside sources and some that heard from somebody else who was there, word gets around the internet really quickly, so just bear with me here. It doesn't seem like Brie Larson's going to be sticking around. She might actually exit the MCU because of how people have responded to her portrayal, and I don't think Marvel has used her in the proper ways. I think there's certain choices that they made that could have gone better in their favor. I'll talk about more of that in the Captain Marvel video. But even then, I don't really think it was that bad as what people were saying. That's not a surprise coming from me, as I've said many times in other instances. But if I'm hearing this right, with the Secret War stuff coming up, it doesn't look like Captain Marvel's going to be sticking around. They might be picking and choosing what's working and what's not, and Captain Marvel might be among those that's not working for them. There might be a soft reboot of sorts with the Secret Wars movie coming up soon in the next few years. I don't know everything about the Secret Wars plot, so I can't say for sure, but if I'm correct, all these different universes might clash and they might create a new universe to settle in. At least that's what I'm hearing. Brie Larson might not be involved, and I think she might want out, as far as I've heard, because she has admitted somewhat that the backlash has gotten to her and she doesn't feel a desire to continue on. To be honest with you, I don't blame her at all if that's the case. There's also another thing from the article that apparently they want to bring back the original 6 members of the Avengers for Secret Wars. Given that it's a multiversal event, if I'm not mistaken, it wouldn't really surprise me if they were going to come back again in some shape or form, or at least maybe if it's a variation of each character, that could be potentially the reason. But if they're going to resurrect Tony Stark after his big sacrifice, I hope and pray to God that is not the case. Maybe I'm totally wrong here. Maybe that's what they're going for, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But that to me sounds like complete ludicrous BS. I literally came up with that on the spot. If it's a soft reboot of some kind, maybe it would make sense. I don't know. But that's ultimately going to be up to the said actors like Robert Downey Jr. And if it's going to happen, it's certainly not going to be cheap. If that's really what they're going for, I really hope and pray that it's for a good reason and not just for the sake of trying to win people back. Because that's the wrong approach. With a multiversal event, that wouldn't surprise me if they're somehow still around. I would prefer if it's a variant of some kind. That would probably be a better approach. I feel like this article might have some truth to it, but I also think it's trying to capitalize on the hate and negative discourse that people are feeling about the MCU at the moment. That's just my guess anyway. If anything, think about what's being said, but take some of it with a grain of salt. But to answer the question, do I think Marvel is in trouble? No, I don't think so. I mean, inevitably, I think after Endgame, no matter what the quality was of each movie, it was going to be really hard to follow up an Endgame shadow. And especially for the negative responses towards certain projects like Multiverse of Madness or Eternals. Having all these high expectations, yeah, it's exciting, but if you're expecting it to be a certain way, that's not a good mindset to go in with. Oh my god, I just remembered something. The Jonathan Majors situation. I haven't really talked about that. It doesn't look like he's guilty of anything, if I remember correctly. They found him innocent on the first set of charges, but it doesn't look too good last time I heard. And that Marvel might actually be considering pivoting towards Doctor Doom. I think inevitably the MCU was going to focus on Doctor Doom. They've already announced the Fantastic Four reboot that's coming up. And we're getting the X-Men, which we're seeing Hugh Jackman finally in the yellow spandex in Deadpool 3. A lot of that is due to the response of Quantumania. I didn't think the movie was that great, but I didn't think it was awful either. If anything, Kang the Conqueror was a highlight, and Jonathan Majors was probably the best part. I mean, everybody else was fine. Plot was just really them trying to navigate the quantum realm and trying to get out, while also avoiding Kang at the same time. They set him up to be an even bigger threat than Thanos. The Loki series has made that explicitly clear, and it looks like due to the circumstances outside of the films, Marvel is preparing to pull the plug on Kang the Conqueror, maybe after the events of Secret Wars. I don't know if that'll happen, but I would not be shocked if that's the case. I don't know how I feel about them pivoting really quickly to Doctor Doom. I would like to see a good portrayal of Doctor Doom because we haven't really seen any of that. I mean, again, this is Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige. Criticize him and hate him all you want, and even with this newer stuff, I think that there's something worthwhile to pull from each one. And the lack of connectivity that people are feeling about this, isn't that what you wanted though? I thought you didn't want so much connectivity. I thought you wanted them to be more standalone. And now we're getting some of that, and what's happening? People are up in arms about it. I can respect them trying something different, but I also am not going to give them a pass just for that reason. Yeah, it might have been a good idea, but you guys clearly dropped the ball. So if anything, I think from what I'm hearing, it sounds like Marvel is going to course correct, that they are going to try to fix some of this stuff. If anyone's smart enough to listen to some input and make a few changes along the way, it's Kevin Feige. He did the same thing with Spider-Man when they found out that they were going to get Spider-Man into their universe. They just had to slightly alter their plans. They follow Hans Gruber's words of wisdom.
But until then, we do not alter the plan.
There's a lot of other projects coming up besides X-Men and Fantastic Four. The new Spider-Man trilogy with Tom Holland's coming up. Charlie Cox is returning as Daredevil. The future, I think, still looks bright for the MCU. I'm hoping and praying that this is a lesson for Marvel Studios to fix some of the stuff that's not working. If other people want to walk away or cry about it, that's on them. That's really my 2 cents on the whole situation. I think that article should not be taken so seriously, at least not with all the stuff that was said, but at least take some of it into account. We'll find out and see how the MCU goes from here. So thanks guys for sitting here and listening to what I have to say. Hopefully I didn't sound like a self-entitled brat or anything talking about this. Did I really need to get on my soapbox about this? Probably not. But this is the MCU we're talking about. Marvel, for crying out loud, which I'm a big fan of. I needed to say something. So thanks again guys for watching. What are your thoughts on this situation and the article from Variety? Whatever it is, just comment below and tell me what your thoughts are. Please keep it civil down there. There's no need to get crazy. Stay tuned for more videos coming up soon. And as always, see you in the next one.